Wonderful. Thank you, Elise. And good afternoon, everyone. Good morning here from Southern California, bright and early. Have a topic today talking about content, artificial intelligence, and productivity that I'm very excited about. This topic came out of a survey that we did a few months ago, and I'll share the results with you shortly, but was really something that we began to think about from the broader perspective of what do we need to do with information? How can artificial intelligence help? And what is the role that modern content plays from a productivity perspective? So let's roll up our sleeves and real quickly talk about kind of our topics for today. So to begin with, we'll kind of explore some of the current productivity challenges that we see, look at the results of that survey, and then talk a little bit about modern content management. I want to emphasize here, yes, we will address some of the content related challenges that we see from a productivity standpoint. But what I really wanted to do was spend a little bit of extra time today talking about the increasing role of artificial intelligence. And we are so excited about the prospect of this technology and what it can do for our customers. And I'm going to share also with you some early examples from an AI and machine learning perspective of some of the impact that we're already seeing with this technology on productivity and how this technology is helping to enhance automation in organizations, make it easier for people to extract critical data and information from content, and even provide new insights into business. So lots of really exciting stuff there. And then finally, I'll share with you some practical examples, kind of bring some customer case studies forward that will put all of this together into hopefully a meaningful whole for you. But to begin with, and what I was originally looking for was, kind of a definition of productivity to kind of anchor our conversation today. And so I went to Merriam-Webster, I looked up the term productivity, and the definition was the quality or state of being productive. Not very helpful, but I then went and looked at the definition of productive. And I thought this was a great way to kind of set the table for our conversation today. So as you kind of go down the different definitions, we get to this definition of productive, yielding results, benefits, or profits. And that's what mostly we think about from a productivity standpoint. And that's a lot of what we want to address today in terms of how do we get better results, better business benefits, and ultimately become more efficient as an organization, which of course increases profitability. So we're going to kind of look at productivity from that perspective, but I also wanted to look at this second definition here, yielding or devoted to the satisfaction of wants or creation of utilities. When we talk about productivity, of course, we're going to focus in on employee productivity and the kind of things that deliver results to the organization from a bottom line perspective. And that's where the automation piece comes into the equation, really. But I think we also need to think about productivity from a customer perspective. And this is that satisfaction of wants piece, where we're really thinking about how are we delivering an outstanding experience to customers? How do we make information and content and critical customer data more accessible to customers? How do we increase their ability to self-service? How do we increase their satisfaction with your organization? And I think this is a critical aspect of productivity. And then there's a third piece where, as we're thinking about addressing some of these modern content challenges, as we're thinking about how we do work today, and particularly how we do work in kind of this COVID environment that we're in, we also need to think about how we're sharing, exchanging, collaborating on information with third-party organizations. Now, for some of our customers, that's really about, how do we create new content for websites, and how do we deliver assets to websites or products to market and things of that nature. But I think it's part of that larger productivity conversation. Now, the piece I didn't put on this slide, which really relates to that second part of that definition about services, is also, how do we create the technical underpinnings that enable this? How easy is it for us to build new applications to increase employee productivity, to increase customer productivity, or third-party collaboration with our organization? If we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, how easy is it for us to work with that technology? Do I need a large team of data scientists, Or is perhaps there a better way for that? So when we put it all together, what we're going to talk about today is some advances from a technology standpoint that can help to improve employee, customer, third-party productivity, but also developer productivity, organizational productivity in terms of how we work with the underlying technologies here that enable this. So let's talk a little bit about productivity and kind of the challenges that we see. And this is that survey, and begins with that survey that we talked about earlier. So this is a survey we ran at the very end of last year. It is out of Europe. It is a UK financial services survey that we ran. And let's first look at some of the results. So in terms of responses from customers, 8 out of 10 customers said their systems are not fully connected to one another. Average response across customers was that they have 9 different solutions in place that contain critical customer information, critical information that they need to do their jobs. So 9 different systems, not fully integrated. The byproduct of that, and this is where that 15% comes into the equation, is that if you look, and this is the average response across over 3,000 respondents to this survey, time spent looking for information on a day-to-day basis. It's literally 1 hour out of the business day. This is looking for information that employees need to do their job. And this is really the content aspect of that productivity challenge, which is access to critical information. And I would argue that if your employees are spending an hour a day looking for information, I guarantee that customers have similar challenges, partners have similar challenges in working with the organization. Now, the other thing that we see here is the potential of artificial intelligence. So the other kind of survey response was, look, we have 60% of respondents who see the potential of AI to automate some of these routine, mundane tasks that are making information difficult to find inside the organization. But kind of that same percentage, almost exactly, say their organization lacks the skills to really capitalize on AI. And this goes to my second point about, hey, what tooling can we put in place to make it easier for organizations to take advantage of AI? So we'll kind of go deep into artificial intelligence, what it is, what it isn't, and how organizations can really get business specific around what they do with machine learning and artificial intelligence. The only other point I would make here on this slide, and it's kind of a disappointing point for me, as I've been involved in this industry for a long, long time, longer than I care to admit. You know, we have had technologies for dealing with content for a long time, 20 plus years of enterprise content management. And I would argue that if we had done this survey, you know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we would have had similar results, same challenges, right? Siloed information, too many solutions, too much time spent looking for content. Now, I would also argue that the advent of AI really kind of begins to give us an answer here for a lot of these challenges, and modern content management also gives us some answers. As we look at content and some of the productivity challenges related to content, what I wanted to do was just quickly kind of outline them and then look at the corresponding business impact. So first and foremost, we talked about those 9 different systems on average. And what we find typically with customers is that those are systems that have been in place for many, many years. So outdated technologies that are difficult to integrate, difficult to combine. And as a result, these technologies have created these information silos. And the outcome, as we talked about in the survey, critical business information is hard to find and even harder to manage. And this has become really important kind of as we look at some modern regulations as well too. So we sometimes talk about GDPR. More recently in the United States, we've got state legislation like the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA, where now organizations are being held accountable for the information they have about consumers. They have to be able to find it, they have to be able to retrieve it, and even delete it or get rid of it if a customer asks them to do so. As we look at that and you think about these different information silos and systems, and I recently did a presentation on this at AIM, you begin to see organizations that are kind of taking extraordinary measures to try to go find all this customer information, gather it together, deliver it to a customer, and then the management part, being able to delete it when a customer says, please delete it, becomes a real challenge for them. So silos, critical challenge for business. And then we look at modern circumstance, right? Remote working, number of different mobile devices in place certainly creates more complexity for organizations. And I would argue this is both an issue from an employee standpoint and from a customer standpoint in terms of how do we deliver information into these environments, how do we consume information from these environments. So if you have 9 different information silos in your organization, most of which are based on outdated technology, it's not very easy for organizations to access that information, deliver that information, enable customer self-service, and particularly customer self-service on mobile devices. And more recently, as we've been talking to customers with remote working circumstances, and remember, we work with very large banks, very large insurance companies, the challenge of having home workers and getting them access to information, setting up VPNs, getting them laptops for employees who traditionally work inside of cubicles. They also haven't thought about how to deliver information outside the 4 walls of the organization. So bottom line here, users can't access critical information when they need it to do the work they need to do. The other thing we see here, business systems, applications, collaboration platform. I don't care whether it's Slack or Zoom or whether it's Salesforce or Guidewire if you're in the insurance business. But increasingly, customers are asking us, how can we deliver content and critical information in the context of how people are doing work? And if you can't plug all these different silos and all these different systems into your critical business applications, into your collaboration applications, what you aren't doing is really delivering critical information at the point where work needs to be done. So common content challenges. Other things that we're seeing here. 1, diversity of information is increasing. What do I mean by this? Literally new types of content. As we talk to insurers today, big challenge. How do I deal with things like video or photos for automobile accidents, automobile claims? As we talk to customers from a customer service standpoint, what we're looking at now is all sorts of different social media channels and different types of social media that have to be incorporated in this environment. And so, 1, we're seeing an explosion of information in terms of diversity and types of information. It's not just about being able to store it and retrieve it, but really being able to actively work with it. And then 2, and I'll skip to the last point here, but we're also seeing scale explode. We're seeing customers that are now looking to capture every SMS message they send to customer, every email that they send to a customer, being able to encapsulate all of this information so that when they are at the point of engagement with customer, they have access to everything that the customer sees. Now, these are organizations that historically perhaps have even created 5 billion, 10 billion objects inside their organization. And now they're talking about capturing 250 million objects a month. So what we're looking at is an organization that will, over the next 3 years, literally double the amount of content and information that they need to manage from what they had generated over the last 20 years. So the scale of what we need to work with is exploding. And then finally, the piece in the middle here about data. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but really what organizations want is data. If we talk about digital transformation, if we talk about effectively managing content, if we talk about automation, it's really a big chunk of that is about getting data out of documents, getting data out of content. If you're dealing with video or audio or even still images, getting really intelligent data about that information, because it's the data that makes that content accessible. It's the data that makes it easy for us to deliver that when, where, and how it is needed in an organization. And I would argue, as you look at artificial intelligence, this is one of the really critical benefits that we see from this technology, is that we can begin to get really intelligent data about content, begin to solve some of these content challenges. So just a few minutes on kind of modern content, and then I'm going to transition into the AI piece. But what I really wanted to talk about here is, in more detail, some of the challenges that we just touched on. So I talked about earlier about the diversity and scale of information that we have to manage. And if you go back just a few years when we talked about content management, it was really a conversation about, scanned images, TIFF images inside of an organization. So when we get paper forms in, we transform them into digital documents, we store them in a repository. And it was also about electronic documents. So predominantly Microsoft documents. Word, Excel, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, things of that nature. And these types of documents and information, I'll give you a great example of this in the AI section in a moment, still present challenges to organizations from a management standpoint. But as we start looking at new types of content, information that doesn't really fit well inside of a database, we also have to start thinking about photos. We have to start thinking about video. We have to start thinking about social media content, SMS messages, email messages, things that represent kind of the entirety of the customer information that we have and are critical to the work that we're doing. As we look at those, and as I said earlier, it's not just about being able to put them someplace and retrieve them, but it's also about being able to work intelligently with them. So if I have a video of an automobile accident, that video could be several minutes long, and there could be critical information embedded in that video that I want to go directly to. So it's not just, again, about having this multi-gigabyte file sitting in a repository somewhere, but giving you the tools to kind of look at that frame by frame, to be able to annotate it, to be able to bookmark it and go directly to critical information that's embedded in there is important from that perspective. And this is something that more modern content platforms have thought about, is giving you that tooling to work with new content types. Same thing on the image side of the equation. You know, we talk to a lot of insurers who are kind of dealing with, hey, I don't get accident reports anymore. I don't get paper documents anymore. I get photos from accidents. I get photos of IDs. I get photos of insurance information from the participants or unfortunately the people who are involved in the incident. And how do we automate the processing of that information? How do we move that information around? You know, iPhone photos are large objects. Do I need to have a full resolution iPhone photo, or can I compress that down and work with a lower resolution version of the document? If I need to move it over large distances, have I thought about how I move that over large distances? So it's not simply about being able to store and retrieve new asset types, but it's about having a repository that will scale up to the volumes that we're talking about and giving you the tooling to work with that information. Now, we talked about silos earlier, and I'm going to kind of talk to you about how we plug silos together in a moment. But the key point I want to make here is, yes, a lot of our customers have legacy environments and struggle with getting information into and out of and kind of combining information across those different legacy silos. But the reality is that these silos aren't going away. Look, you can kind of take a rationalization approach and begin to kind of combine together some of these legacy environments, and certainly encourage customers to think about getting off of some of these older technologies, taking advantage of new cloud technologies, all these different things. But while we're doing that, what we're seeing is kind of a proliferation of silos inside of organizational environments. So this might be content that's created in Salesforce, and Salesforce has some lightweight content management capabilities. This might be content that's shared inside of a sync and share or a content collaboration environment like a Box or a Dropbox. This might be content that sits inside of Slack. This also might be information that lives in SharePoint or in different email platforms inside of your organization, Google Docs. Right? Think about all the different tools that you have for sharing content, collaborating on content inside your organization. It's not a realistic approach to kind of say, hey, move all of this into one repository. It is a realistic approach, however, to kind of say, look, there are ways that we can connect to this information, access this information, and make it easier for us to leverage all of this information on kind of a global scale, and we'll talk about that. Now, part and parcel of that equation, as I talked about earlier, is data. right? And when we talk about kind of the concept of really intelligent information management, when we talk about kind of the difference between content and information, the critical aspect here is data, okay? The information that we have about information is kind of typically with content, what we call metadata, is what makes content accessible, easy to find, easy to retrieve inside of an organization. Data also makes content contextual, which means that we know when, where, and how we need this information to enable work inside the organization. Clearly, we also want to think about availability. So, as we are applying data to content, as we are making it more findable, more contextual, we also want to be able to think about how we deliver it. And that's for remote working circumstances, that's for mobile circumstances, that's for customer self-service circumstances. All of that contributes to making content instantly available to the people who need it. And if we think about this right, and this last point here, the people have the right to access it. So we want to use that data to make it accessible, contextual, and available anytime, anywhere, but we also want to be able to use that data to make sure that your information is properly governed, it's secure, and when you're subject to different compliance requirements, we're able to respond to those efficiently and effectively. And in order to do this, and this will be kind of my last point on content before we get into AI, we really want to think about content in a new way. Think about content not as kind of enterprise content management, but really as an enterprise service to the organization. So instead of saying, hey, I've got one tool, all of the information should live in one repository, and then on top of that, I'll give you a bunch of different suites and products that'll help you access that information. Instead, we want to take kind of a more modern, and this is that content services approach where we say, let's establish a common service for content, regardless of where it lives inside the organization. So if you start at the bottom of this diagram, look at it from the standpoint of different silos in the organization. So that could be existing ECM environments, plugging into those, being able to access, retrieve, perhaps enrich content from those environments. That can be cloud storage environments, whether that's Amazon S3, Glacier, or different storage environments from Google or Microsoft Azure, thinking about where we put content in the future, how we move that content to the cloud. So I talked about that earlier. That can be EFSS environments, that can be business applications that store content. But the bottom line is, rather than thinking about one repository, what we really should be thinking about is a service that is able to access content where it lives inside the organization. And then in order to effectively manage that, we think about that kind of universal data model that sits on top of that and normalizes all of that information so that it is now accessible to different services. That can be anything from AI and machine learning services to content management services to case and process management services. And then, of course, on top of that, you really want to think, and this is where that kind of common enterprise service for content comes into play, having a comprehensive API that really allows you to now deliver all of that information, bridging those silos into different applications inside your organization. So that can be your business and productivity apps, that can be custom built content and case management solutions inside your organization, and that can be even your mobile apps and services that you use either for your employees, for your customers, or for third parties inside your organization. The important thing here is this is how we get to that concept of kind of content in context of the work that users are performing. And of course, we also want to think about, hey, we need to do this iteratively. We need to do this quickly. And I'll touch on that in a moment. But another aspect of productivity is how quickly can we enable this new vision of content as an enterprise service. So let's get to the heart and soul of our conversation today, which is really about AI and productivity. And as I said, I'm really excited about this as a tool that customers can use to really bring greater automation, greater intelligence into their environment. Now, it requires some work. right? And it's not as simple as just saying, hey, I have AI and therefore I'm solving all my problems. But let's talk a little bit about how we get there. First and foremost, from a productivity standpoint, when we talk about artificial intelligence, and in particular today, kind of machine learning, what are some of the productivity problems that we see here? So first and foremost, we talked about data. And metadata extraction and data extraction from content is a really, really critical use case. We see it both from a content management perspective in terms of how we work with text-based documents and things like that, and also from a digital asset management or rich media management perspective in terms of how we work with images, videos, and other things. So it gives us unprecedented and new capabilities to kind of automate how we extract data and information from content. And this is the kind of work that people don't like to do and that machines are really, really good at. Other opportunities here, and I'll talk to you about some automation use cases, but we can begin to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to make decisions, to review information, to begin to identify exceptions, to bring greater automation process. We can also think about things like auto categorization here, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. And then finally, kind of on the edge right now of what we're seeing from an AI perspective, we're also seeing organizations that are beginning to develop new insights about their business that they can then leverage to increase their productivity, to make decisions, to make more informed decisions in their organization. I'll give you an example of one of the things that we're working with a customer on right now. Before I dig into AI, I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between kind of commodity services, public cloud services for AI, and then kind of contrast that with what we see from organizations that are beginning to build their own custom models for artificial intelligence. And before you get concerned about custom models, we'll also talk about how we can make that more accessible for people moving forward. That shouldn't be a massive barrier to leveraging AI in your organization, but we think there are some unique benefits of leveraging custom models for machine learning. Before I do that, let's talk a little bit about kind of public cloud services for AI, because they have their role and they have their value. So as you likely know, and if you look down the right-hand side, there are a number of different public cloud services that offer deep learning capabilities. They're available from Google, from Amazon, Azure. There are even specialized vendors in the universe who provide AI services, organizations like SiteEngine. So there's a lot of third-party cloud services that you can easily plug into. You give them content and they'll give you some form of data back. These are pre-trained machine learning models. They're machine learning models that have been trained on publicly available information. So they provide commodity services. So OCR, ICR, you want to process forms, extract data from forms, whether that's handwritten data or typewritten or computer-generated data, there are services for that. There are services that provide sentiment analysis. So, for example, I'll put two of these together: the transcription service and the sentiment service. If you have a call center interaction, you can literally take the audio, you can transcribe that audio, speech to text, and then you can apply sentiment analysis to the audio to see if the customer was happy or unhappy. You can do sentiment analysis on email, on SMS messages, social media content. So another public cloud service out there. Translation, 200 different languages. If you need to translate text, fantastic services for that using artificial intelligence. You can even do things like facial recognition, celebrity recognition inside of images. So lots of public commodity services out there that you can plug into and leverage for different things. We utilize services like this for OCR, ICR in our own activities. We utilize transcription services in our demos when we're dealing with video and we want to apply subtitles and subtext to videos. These are great services. They're available. They're stackable, so you can use one and then another, as I talked about earlier, that transcription and sentiment analysis type use case. And the key thing here is when you're looking at kind of a modern content platform, look for platforms that kind of give you a standardized approach, a framework that allows you to plug into multiple services, doesn't necessarily marry you to one particular service. You, for example, might like Microsoft's cognitive services better for certain things, or Amazon services for other things. The only caution we give customers here about these public cloud services, you got to be aware of the law of large numbers. When you look at Their costs on paper, they look fantastic. They're like fractions of a penny per transaction. But then we start dealing with customers who want to work with hundreds of thousands of different documents in the course of a month. And those charges begin to add up. Now, in certain circumstances, they deliver very good information and certainly worth the investment there. But you got to kind of weigh that as you look at it. The challenge with generic services, as I talked about earlier, is that they are trained on generic sets of information. So it's not information that's specific to your business. And I like to use this example, kind of an accident claim example, to really illustrate the difference. So what I did here is I took an accident claim photo, and believe it or not, they're kind of hard to find online, but managed to find one here. And I loaded it into, and there's a great little public service on Google for their Vision API, which is a deep learning tool that you put a photo into it and it returns back a set of tags related to the accident. And as you can see here, it returns some really valuable data and information about this particular photo, right? It correctly identifies that there's a car or motor vehicle in the photo. It talks about vans and even gets pretty specific here. Sport utility vehicle, correctly identifies the vehicle on the left is a Chevrolet Tahoe. And yes, sorry, American cars here in this photo. But you also get a lot of information that isn't really valuable. Minivan's inaccurate. Minibus is inaccurate. I don't know where the tag for gas comes from. Certainly there's asphalt in the picture, but I don't know how relevant that is. This is a good example of, as we use this, it shows the power of AI. I can give it an image with no data associated with that and get back a bunch of data, some of which is relevant to the picture. The challenge is, what does an insurer really need to process this information? What do we really want out of this picture? Two things. One, we don't want a bunch of labels in kind of a tagging environment. What we really want to do is to begin to extract critical information here and what we kind of call entity extraction, be able to map that back to specific data fields. So what I really want to be able to do is train a model that's going to identify, hey, tell me what two vehicles are involved in this accident. Brand, Chevrolet, model, Tahoe, color of the vehicle, gold mist metallic, in the actual manufacturer's color tone. The other thing that's critical information in this accident photo is I have a license plate from the state of Illinois, and I have a license number that's visible here. So I want to be able to read and extract that information. And if you think about this, one, I've trained a model to give me very intelligent information, and a lot of our automobile insurers have a ton of data and content like this that they can use to train models. And two, as I'm extracting this information, what I'm really doing is, one, increasing productivity, eliminating manual work that needs to be done inside of an organization. But two, I'm also putting it into fields and enabling work to be performed. I now have information that allows me to push this to the next step in a workflow that allows me to make intelligent decisions about this. If I know the license number and that's an insured person related to an insurance policy that I have, now I can reference that policy, retrieve that policy inside my organization. So there's some real benefit here to more custom machine learning models. Now, let me give you some examples. And before I do that, just real quickly, referring back to the kind of how do we bridge content silos. So we talk about AI and we talk about kind of bridging across different legacy environments. One of the challenges we have is around metadata. And as you can see, we have powerful tools here. I showed you an image example, but similarly for text, where we can go back and look at legacy silos in your organization, extract critical information out of that documentation. You can use that information for establishing retention policies. You can use that metadata information for making that data in these different silos more accessible. And what I would argue here is that one of the real benefits of AI, besides kind of that productivity work automation standpoint, is just about information findability. What we find with a lot of silos, why they're silos, is because they have very limited data about the content that they store. And they weren't built with finding that information in mind. And what we can do with AI now and machine learning models is go back in and really enrich that data, establish kind of a master metadata model, and perhaps even create new metadata in the process, and kind of normalize this across your different silos, which inherently increases the findability and accessibility of information. So there's your kind of your information extraction piece, but let's talk about some automation pieces here too. These are two actual customer examples of POCs that we have worked on with customers. So first and foremost, this is just forms processing, right? But one of our large insurers in the United States, 60% of the forms that they get inbound, and this is really around policy issuance, still handwritten. And the first thing that they want to figure out is the form completed correctly? So first we need to classify that form, right? So we receive a form from a customer, what form is it? And then once we know what form it is, we then have the ability to be able to determine, has it been completed correctly? Is it signed in the right places? Do we have data in the right places? And this is not an extraction exercise at this point. This is just hey, I'm going to take a look at the form. It's an image recognition type use case and determine whether I have the right information in the right places. If I don't, now I can immediately launch an exception handling process. If you think about this historically, there are people that are processing these forms, and they're not just paper forms, right? Nowadays, people scan things, send them in. They're digital documents, and what we want to be able to do, hand them to a service, look at it, see if the form has been completed correctly. If it hasn't, we immediately kick it back for exception handling. We can push it to a customer service representative, for example, go back to the customer. We can even identify what parts of the form haven't been completed correctly. Completely eliminate any dependency, time lag with humans, really apply machine learning here to do some intelligent things. Once the form has been completed correctly, now we can do the entity extraction, as in the example earlier. We can process that form, we can do the OCR, ICR aspect of it, and then we can intelligently route that form, now that we have the data out of it, to the right work performer inside the organization. So automation to increase productivity. The other thing that we talked about was insight and new intelligence for the business. And here's a really cool use case that we've again seen with one of our property and casualty insurer customers. What they want to be able to do here, and this is really about an image processing use case, is as someone submit photos for an insurance claim, the first thing that they want to be able to do is kind of process images and identify whether or not a duplicate photo with a previous claim is being submitted. Unbeknownst to me, but apparently it's very common for people to submit the same photos for multiple accidents in a fraudulent scenario. So this is a very simple example of fraud detection, but where we can take machine learning, compare two photos together, and identify whether that photo has been used in a previous incident. Now you think about this from a human perspective, and particularly for a large insurer, they have thousands of claims processors inside the organization. The odds of that claims processor across two different policies, three different policies, identifying that the same photo has been used, very, very low. The odds of a machine learning environment, a custom machine learning model identifying it, very, very high. So very simple use case, but very powerful and beneficial for the organization. But I also talked about new insights. So the other piece here that they want to do is look at their larger repository, and we kind of call this a content lake of previous accident photos and all of the damage information they have here, and really the costs associated with those accident photos. So now I get a photo, I determine it's not fraudulent. Next step in the process, I take that photo and I compare it to other photos that I already have in my environment and look for similar make, similar model, similar type of damage. So if I have damage to the front left fender on a red Honda Civic, now I look for similar damage from previous claims. And what I'm able to extract there is a very intelligent damage estimate based on repairs that we've done previously. And if you think about this again from an automation and productivity standpoint, now I can look at it, and if it's a simple accident and a simple set of damage, I can hand that information immediately. I don't have to have a claims adjuster go out and look at it or anything else. I can take that information, I can pass the damaged photos off to my auto repair network, get estimates back, compare it against the estimate that I was able to generate from my model. And for the ones that kind of sit inside of there, now I can kind of almost straight through process a claim based on this machine learning information. So an organization looking to tap into the power of the information they already have in an exciting new way to increase productivity, increase automation inside of their organization. Now, let me give you a really practical example. And in this case, this is, and I'm giving you some screenshots from an actual demo, and I've taken a POC that we did. I've taken some of the photos out here, or the customer branding out. But this is a proof of concept that we are running right now for a leading hotel, global hotel organization. This is an organization that operates in multiple countries, multiple regions, manages multiple brands of hotels, and our solution there is a global knowledge management platform. So what we do is we track technical manuals, best practices, branding guidelines, all sorts of information for these different hotel properties in these different regions around the world. The challenge that they have is as they create new documentation, perhaps new manuals, new best practices, and ingest them into their environment, what they need to be able to do is then designate where and those documents are applicable for the different hotel brands and in what regions. And if you think about it, it's not unusual for them to have one document that applies to perhaps 5 different regions and 10 different brands, which means that it needs to go into 50 different places inside of our environment. It doesn't really. What it really needs is to have the right data tagging applied to it to make it accessible to those different brands in those different regions. And that's what we're doing right now with machine learning. So we're able to look at a new manual, for example, process through it, and immediately identify, hey, which brands does this apply to, in which regions, and then automatically publish that document out to those different brands and to those different regions. It's a very simple use case. It's actually a difficult use case from an AI and machine learning perspective, but it saves this organization a tremendous amount of time on a daily basis. And this is an example of the power of machine learning. So, long story short, and I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll kind of accelerate through the back half of this, but the bigger promise of AI is really, and as we look further out, how do we understand content and data as well as a knowledgeable human, but we do it at scale? And this is where we can begin doing things like, and as we look further out on the horizon, how do we predictively deliver information to a worker before they even know that they need the information to perform work? How do we analyze usage? And how do we begin to recognize the importance of certain aspects of information inside of your organization and elevate those up in the organization because they're more commonly consumed? Can we recognize patterns, connections? That's where fraud detection comes in, right? It's all about patterns, connections, and also can we identify outlying data points? And this is really that exception processing aspect of it. We believe that there's so much yet to be discovered on the AI side of the equation that will further enhance productivity for our customers. We're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg here, but the power and the examples that we're seeing right now are really, really inspiring for us organizationally. Real quickly, and I'm going to skip through this part just because I'm running out of time, but as an example, I just wanted to point out, look, a lot of organizations are kind of, and the survey pointed this out earlier, intimidated by AI and machine learning, and particularly the prospect of kind of training their own models. We've done some work. We recently did an announcement here around, creating a service that allows you to use your own content, your own data to train your own machine learning models, and then really putting a front end environment on that service that makes it easy for you to train your own models, administer your own models. You can't really see the interfaces here, but really, giving you insight into what content, what information is going to be valuable for helping you build out a model that will deliver real business impact for your organization. I would certainly encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to get a demo of Nuxio Insight and some of the things that we're able to do here. We can show you some of our POCs live. We can show you how this interface works live, because I believe that this is about making machine learning AI capabilities more accessible for users. We also look at this from the standpoint of, and we talked earlier about common platform with AI capabilities, the ability to bridge across content silos. All I'm going to say here is you should also look for solutions that make it easy for you to build applications on top of that environment. Underlying core capabilities for AI, for content, for process management, but also kind of a low-code paradigm for helping you quickly build new applications, because this is the challenge so many of our customers have, is they have the underlying capabilities, but it's so hard for them to express them in new applications. Also, as you're thinking about this and kind of moving forward from a modernization standpoint, think about how you get there, connecting those different silos, beginning to consolidate some of those existing legacy systems in your environment moving forward. And we can make that very efficient, very easy. We can make that journey to the cloud along the way also very efficient and easy. Now, let me just give you a few examples. And these are all banking and insurance customers, because we do a lot of work there, as I talked about earlier. But, you know, great example here, right? We have a customer looking to replace multiple legacy ECM systems. Critical outcome here, they wanted to integrate to their customer service system, so be able to bridge those silos, present that information from a customer service perspective. They also needed to implement a new mobile application for personalized statement delivery to customers. And underneath all of this, we talked about subject action requests, GDPR, compliance. One of the real challenges they saw here, and this is one of the first places we saw it with the large UK bank, is, hey, we have real difficulty responding to these customer data requests, and ultimately being able to delete that information if we need to. This is a very large bank also in Europe, but with global deployments here. For them, proliferation of doc types. Biggest thing for them was they were asking customers iteratively, multiple times, for identification, for identity verification information across the organization. And what they're really looking to do here is move off, again, legacy systems, get those out of place, but two, have that common content as a service for them, so that once they capture customer identity verification information, they can leverage it across the organization anywhere in the world for any business process that involves customers in their organization. And again, productivity outcome, streamlined exchange of information from a customer experience standpoint, and also just faster time to market for them from a product standpoint. Last example here, again, multiple instances of legacy ECM environments. This is a customer that is thinking about 15 billion documents, objects that they need to move over the next 3 years into the environment. And again, punchline here, better manage and utilize information for a superior customer experience. So that customer productivity piece that I talked about earlier, but also recognizing that there are new content types here. So they're dealing with voice, chat, audio, other rich media aspects. So I apologize for having to skim through that last piece. Got a little bit excited about the AI section and the content section at the front, but we certainly have a few minutes left for questions. So if we want to open it up at this point, happy to take questions.